That's what I mean by outcome focused. The point is that we get what we want. It's not to make sure that we are all in agreement on the ideological framework we use to do it. It's to get what we want. And that to me is really, really important as a politician.
Pause. So right there, right, and I love that, and I'm 100% for that, and I think you know that as a close friend of you. Talk to me a little bit about like the change management that you think is going to need to go into that, right? Like you, outcome county commissioner, fantastic, but now you have to work with all those people that have that viewpoint. So talk to me a little bit about your experience with changing people's minds and how you intend to kind of go into that. Loaded question, I know, but
Sure. Well, I think the most direct way to talk about it is to speak to my experience with that kind of conflict, right?
yeah.
I work in an industry that is rife with misinformation and misunderstanding. And my job, my day job, is to spend time with people helping them understand complex things and figure out how to get what they want within a complex system. Um, for those on the live stream, Josh and I work together, and we've worked together for a while. And so Josh has seen a bit of how I work here, but most of the time, the way I want to get into problem solving is by trying to understand the problem first. I think we operate a lot on assumption, and we assume that people align with our view if they use the same words that we do. We assume people don't align with us if they don't use the same words we do. And so a lot of what I do at the beginning of a conflict or a discussion, problem solving, is making sure that we're using the same vocabulary, that we understand each other. That requires a lot of patience and listening and asking questions before I really get to say what I think. But it means the outcome is better. I've said for a long time, like if you just spend a half hour with somebody clarifying vocabulary, time well spent. Because then from that point on, you know you're speaking the same language when you talk to each other. I think from there, it's about making sure that you're accounting for all of the potential risks of whatever solution you're proposing. In business, there are a lot of unintended consequences to almost any decision. That's a hallmark of working in complexity, right? Complex systems are naturally unpredictable. So I want to know as much as I can about how the system works because that will help me best account for those risks and it'll help me best advise on what solution is probably the most appropriate. In order to affect change in Cowlitz County, I think no less than every person in Cowlitz County needs to be accounted for. You can't functionally go talk to literally every person in a county, even our size, 110,000 people, but you can go and ask as many people as you can think of. And you can put calls out and say, hey, please make sure that, you speak up. I try to take an attitude of listening and engaging first in what people need and how they're thinking about something, and then advise from my experience on the ideal solution that won't have any unintended consequences or as many as we can predict, right? Does that help?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does
Cool.
help. So I appreciate the extra detail, my friend. All right. As we kind of move back to some of the problems that you see in your county, kind of when you were talking through your core beliefs, how do you start prioritizing those? Where do you start, and what do
Yeah,
you
I
believe?
think the focus has to be on the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I say community, by the way, that always means every single thing inside of the borders of Cowlitz County, no exceptions, right? When I talk about community, I'm not talking about like my community, my friends, my family. I do mean everybody in Cowlitz County. And if when we go and make decisions, we are not doing our best to account for the community, we're going to miss whatever we might see besides, right?
Sure.
Look, I think it's fine to be selfish. I do. I think that it's natural for us to be thinking about ourselves. And for the most part, I don't have the expectation that other people are going to have the same heart for Cowlitz County as I do in a position like this. But when it comes down to the decisions we make, my focus is going to be on the community and on everyone who's affected by that. And if the thing that you want is going to have a negative impact on some aspect of the community, I'm going to challenge that idea because I want to figure out if there's a way for you to get what you want, again, without having a negative effect that we could avoid, right? So for me, it's always going to be the community first. Secondarily, I think, my relationships, of course, and then, of course, myself. But the community has to be at the center of all of it. I think to really support a community, going back to that growing by supporting concept, we really need to focus on meeting basic needs, making sure that people have what they need, that they have opportunity, that they have resources, because that's also how we make sure we grow well, right? We can just grow, we could just get more money, but more money without making sure that everybody's okay, it misses an aspect of the community. I'm going to try to be as comprehensive as I can. If I think that's a good word to kind of sum it up.
Yeah, and I think one thing to just take a couple steps back, right? And if we're gonna dive into this later in this stream or down the road in other streams, just we can put a bow on it. But you talked a lot about doing what the community needs and doing what serves the entire community, which I love. What do you think the best way to uncover that, right? Like, you as an individual live in your community in your world, right? But there are so many other worlds and universes in that county. So talk to me a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
There's a couple different ways you can engage with a community of this size without going and speaking to literally every person, right?
Sure.
Look, if I really had all of the time and energy and resources at my disposal, I would love to go and sit down with each person in Cowlitz County and hear their thoughts. But I also have to be realistic. That's a logistical challenge, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to maintain a posture of openness, right? I want to make sure that I'm not going to assume I'm right about something until it's been confirmed. And I want to go to the people who have the exposure to particular pieces of this community, and I want to ask them first what they think. That means going to leaders. It means going to people who are in the trenches doing the work and asking about what they see, right? So sitting down with leaders of nonprofits that are doing the kinds of things that I want to see happen in our community, asking them what they need, asking them how we could be supportive, right? What resources do you need? What things are in your way? What barriers can we help overcome? Going to people within government who are decidedly focused on a particular aspect of this community and asking what they need, right? So mayors of cities, leaders of smaller communities, I want to go to those people and ask them what they see and figure out if there's some way for us to work together. I don't think it's realistic to expect engaging conversation with every single person in Cowlitz County, but it also doesn't need to just be me. I expect leaders within my community to be going and engaging with their section, their subset of Cowlitz County. And I expect that I can go to them and ask them, what do you see? If those leaders don't have answers for me, I have to figure out some other way to engage, right? Yeah. So there's other kind of practical stuff you could do. You could do text messaging, you could do emails, you could do, more community engagement and outreach. But I want to start there because I think that's probably the most efficient way to collect all of that perspective, right?
Yeah. And it leads me into one other thing that I wanted to dive deeper into with you is, naturally you aren't always going to agree with everybody. So as you start going to those leaders, how do you make sure that you stay open to different perspectives and, leaders that are going to challenge your own beliefs? How do you partner with them?
Oh man, I love talking to people I disagree with. It's so much fun. So look, like a little bit about me, right? Like as a person, I am just fascinated by how people think. In my like personal study, the area I have spent the most time and energy trying to understand is how people make decisions. One of the things I've come to for myself is I've never seen somebody make a consciously bad choice. Right? Like I don't think people sit around and think, "What's the worst thing I could do?" you know.
Fair enough.
So, so if I disagree with somebody on an issue, the first thing I want to do is dive into how they got there, right? Like, what's your context? I'll pull back from the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton. He said, people wind up in such unique situations and such unique circumstances that we often see good and wise men on both the right and the wrong side of issues that matter to all of us. He talked about forgetting the balance between freedom and effective government, right? He said an effective government without freedom is not really all that effective, and freedom without an effective government is not really freedom, right? And he was kind of speaking to the challenge of balancing conflicting perspectives.
Sure.
If there's one thing I'm excited about, it's talking to people who disagree with me and figuring out why that's the case. There's always going to be some value in that discussion, even if it's that we recognize that we disagree and we understand each other's reasoning for that disagreement. But I think the people that you disagree with are usually the ones that can give you perspective outside of your own. My dad and I don't align really at all politically. Like we get into not arguments, right, but disagreements because we're both kind of scholarly and we like to study stuff. And I always come away from those conversations understanding something a little bit better than I did before, even if it's just in the conversation talking out loud about those ideas and seeing the response and hearing the questions that are asked. There's value there.
Yeah.
You asked me, like, how do I stay open? Oh man, I think it's just being fascinated by people.
Yeah.
I truthfully am just, I never get bored of hearing how somebody got to their conclusion. Yeah.
Well, you said something that I identify with so much is, especially with your conversations with your dad, always walking away with understanding something a little bit differently or a little bit better than you did before. Just, I don't know, it stuck with me. And it's something that I yearn for in conversations. And it's like that, light bulb moment, as everybody says, to be cliche. It's like, wow, just never thought about that. And I think that's why, like, I'm excited for you to be doing what you're doing right now and excited to hear you talk about these things the way that you are. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, look, like, I think disagreement is fine. I think that there's a lot of emphasis placed on us needing to agree with each other in order for us to move forward. And I just don't think that's true. I think we can get what we want and hold those disagreements in tension. I had a college professor who used the phrase, he said, you have to live in the tension. There's always going to be conflict. There's never going to be a right answer. As long as we have a community this large, two people disagreeing mean an issue is complicated, right? So I don't think that we actually need to walk away in full agreement about the right way to get something done. I do think we need to agree on the best place to start, and we need to have a solid plan for how we're going to test out those ideas. We need to be willing to say, hey, maybe I'm wrong about this. Let's make sure we are in agreement that we're going to come back to the table after we try this out, right? But those ideological disagreements, I just don't see a whole lot of value in trying to argue. I think as long as we understand each other and as long as we understand why we think the way that we do, and as long as we're focused on not causing harm, disagreement is fine. Harm is really critical for me, by the way, on that, because one area that I really struggle with is disagreements that ultimately root back to taking something away from somebody. I think that, again, because one of those values for me is that free choice with care,
Mm,
if your opinion does not necessarily include people having the agency to decide what's best for themselves, as long as, again, as long as there's not harm, it's going to be really hard for us to align,
mhm.
because it's really, really important to me that people are given the ability to decide for themselves on those things that are not, impacting other people, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I wrote down as you were talking, live in the tension. I love that. I think it's something, and I mean, you called it out. We work for the same company, and our leader always talks about hiring people that are delightful to disagree with. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big proponent of what you're talking about. And then just to feed off of, like, you've been serious this whole time, right? But I think as the topic of harm has come up,
Yeah.
there was a new seriousness in you, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
then. So talk to me a little bit about, how you ensure that the policies and decisions that you stand by and that you want to implement really serve your community. How what are your checks and balances, for a lack of better words?
If you want to meet a need, you have to understand that need in its fullest sense, right? So, if we want to enact a particular policy,
Mhm.
it's really, really important that we use the mechanisms of government to ensure that we get feedback on those decisions, and to ensure that if somebody feels they're going to be harmed by that decision, we hear them out. I think there's a degree of patience involved in that, because I'm going to come into politics with, sure, my opinions on how things should be. I have to be willing to be wrong, right? And I also have to be willing to hear people out when they say, look, your plan just didn't account for me. And that means it needs to change, right? Harm is something we'll have to dive into a little bit more. I don't know that right now it's appropriate to really like define that, but I think there's a few really tangible examples of harm. There is people's sense of safety, their security, right? When somebody feels that their security is being threatened, that's a form of harm, I think. When their autonomy is threatened, their ability to think and act freely is that's a kind of harm that people feel. When resources are taken away from them, that's a very real harm. When rights are taken away from them, that's real harm. And so I think to make sure that the policies and decisions that I'm making account for the community, I have to be open to the fact that I'm just not going to think of everything. I have to go ask people, what am I missing? That's a posture I have to hold constantly, forever, I think,
Mhm.
in order to really be able to do this well.
Yeah.
Again, that priority is on the community, and that means accounting for every single thing in Cowlitz County. All right, I keep doing this, by the way, because Cowlitz County is kind of shaped like a little
Yeah.
rectangle. We have a little swoop.
Yeah.
um, every single thing in Cowlitz County needs to be accounted for, and my job is to investigate and understand the need and ensure that I've accounted for as many of the consequences of those decisions as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. And talk to me a little bit about, again, kind of a loaded question, but you just said it's impossible to do it. It's not a one person job, right? You can't account for an entire county by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, and something that stuck out to me, and part of that answer was, enacting parts of the government to elicit that type of feedback,
Yeah,
right? Do you feel like we have good forms of that feedback? Do you feel like that's something that you need to build on and enable your community to give your government feedback in a better manner?
I absolutely think there are mechanisms in place to get
Mm-hmm.
that feedback. For example, the county commissioners have regular meetings that are open to the public that people can come in and comment. They can write letters. There's probably, I think there are some things we could do to make those more accessible to people who are, working during the day. The regular Tuesday meeting is at 9 a.m. And
Yeah.
I personally can't attend that because I'm employed, right? But besides that, I do think there are other ways we could be soliciting feedback.
Hmm.
I think building connections and relationships with organizations is one way we can do that. And on the side, I've got projects with friends of mine that are really focused on kind of drawing those connections because those organizations have an audience. They have a group of people who are listening to them for their thoughts, for their questions. And I can go to those organizations and say, "Do you mind going to your group and asking, hey, what do you think about this?" Right? There has to be some proactivity here. I can't just sit back in my chair and wait for people to come to me. We're all so busy and our lives are so complicated that to expect that everyone's going to drop whatever they're doing and come talk to me about the thing I care about that affects me is a little naive.
Yeah.
So I do think there are existing mechanisms to kind of wrap back to your question. I do think there are existing mechanisms for feedback in government. I don't know that those mechanisms are very effective if your focus is not chasing people down. If we expect people to just come to us with feedback, we're going to miss the very important things that we didn't think of, right?
No,
Hope that fills it in.
no, it does. It absolutely does. Well, awesome, Joe. I mean, your passion is infectious, and I love to see somebody who leads with community in mind. So I really appreciate you walking me through all of that, and I look forward to continuing on with this and some of our other sections today.
Thank you, friend. Let me set up the little cue here, and then we'll close this one out.